I would just ask you, I've never actually my.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So why don't we switch seats? So I'll be on your other side, closer to your right ear. And I will speak left, and we'll have the microphone as well.
I feel like an old man.
Can I get a picture of you?
Sure.
Thank you.
Oui. Bonjour. Oui, ça va bien, merci. Est-ce que c'est le premier? Oui, vraiment. Comme ça, en personne. Oui, c'est ça. C'est un grand plaisir. Merci à vous. Merci pour nous accueillir ce soir.
Vous êtes?
Ah, c'est...
Ah, vous êtes.
Il faut moi nommer là.
Je ne sais pas qui vous êtes. Merci.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jacques Sala. I'm the co-president of the Montreal Holocaust Museum. I would like to thank you for joining us today as we are celebrating this Human Rights Day. It's a day which is dedicated to compassion, tolerance, and dignity. I'd like also to thank the Canadian Uyghur Congress, so Temple Emanu-El, Dorothy Zellman-Howard, who is not here tonight with us, but I understand she was very instrumental from the very beginning of this request, and all the professionals of the Montreal Holocaust Museum for their contribution to making this happen. Allow me to just take one more second. These professionals from the museum, we rarely speak about them. They're doing a fantastic work, and I want to take you as witnesses to this remarkable work performed by this exceptional team at Montreal. You know, on a personal note, the fight for human rights has been right, left, and center in our family life, in the way we have raised our children, and I'm happy to report that the way they are raising their own children after that. It has been the main thrust of my involvement in politics. As a member of parliament and as a Canadian minister, I have been privileged to work on several cases, some more successful than others, and they gave meaning to my political endeavor. I can refer to the restoring of the presence of the International Red Cross in Chiapas, for instance, to protect indigenous populations. I can refer to the introduction of civilian justice in Indonesia when the Chinese minority was being harassed and aggressed. I can refer to the dramatic saving of a journalist's children who were caught in Congo with their grandmother. He was able to escape, but they were stuck there, and they wanted to kill the children because he escaped. Finally, we were able to get the kids out. They took revenge and killed the grandmother instead. I can refer to reunification of Kosovar families, of Afghani families, and so on and so forth. So I want to tell you that when Kat called me, and where is Kat? When Kat Mano called me and said, would you help us by doing the introduction and so on? It didn't take much time, right, Kat? It went fast. It was yes, right away, with great pleasure, great pleasure. Now, this pleasure is also increased tremendously with the perspective that I had to meet with you. Rabbi Grushcow, our paths have crossed so often on the internet. You even came once to the South Shore of Montreal, but I wasn't there. So finally we get to meet. And you know, it's quite fascinating, the Kayum. I feel for your cause. I'm moved by your action. I'm sorry, I had the text, I'm completely out of it. I left my text altogether. But I wanted to start by saying that because to me that is a real privilege to have you both here tonight. When our museum talks about transmitting the human rights legacy of the Holocaust, it is precisely moments like tonight that help accomplish this crucial responsibility. This launch highlights the tragic yet resilient connection between Jewish and Uyghur communities and the importance of allyship in confronting genocide today. This evening, we have the honor of celebrating the Uyghur community's efforts to find strength and hope in Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl's literary masterpiece, Man's Search for Meaning. Considered one of the most influential books of the last century, Man's Search for Meaning has sold over 16 million copies and been translated into more than 50 languages. Based on Dr. Frankl's story of physical and spiritual survival during the Holocaust, this important work has helped generations of readers around the world cope with suffering. Most recently, it has been translated to the Uyghur language following requests from Uyghur community leaders like Kayum Masimov, who found inspiration in Frankl's words. For several years, Uyghur and other Turkic Muslim minorities in China have faced mass detention, forced labor, torture, and forced sterilization. In February 2021, the Canadian Parliament passed a non-binding motion acknowledging these crimes as acts of genocide. To guide us through the discussion tonight, we are joined by these two people that I was referring to a minute ago. And I'm sorry, the order of my presentation is completely mixed up. Don't pay attention. Let me give you a brief note about the biography of our two guests. Rabbi Lisa Grushcow was ordained at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion and has been the senior rabbi of Temple Emanu-El-Beth Sholom since 2012. Born and raised in Canada, her BA is from McGill University, and she earned her master's and doctoral degrees at Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. Beginning with the Jewish Christian Muslim Conference in Bendorf, Germany, Rabbi Grushcow has a long history of interfaith bridge building and is currently involved with the Solidarity Dialogues in Montreal. As a Hartman Senior Rabbinic Fellow and past president of the Montreal Board of Rabbis, she is actively engaged in Jewish pluralism. She has continued her academic endeavors as a visiting scholar at the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies and is affiliate faculty at the School of Religious Studies at McGill University. Kayum Masimov holds a BA degree in International Relations and a master's degree in Economics from Vanderbilt University. He is actively engaged in the Canadian Uyghur community and served as its head from 2012 to 2015 and participated in numerous parliamentary hearings dedicated to the Uyghur cause. He served as project coordinator at the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project from its conception until 2024. Today, he is the representative of the World Uyghur Congress for Canada and is also an official translator, interpreter in Uyghur, Turkish, French, and Russian. Most notably for our audience, he spearheaded the translation project of Man's Search for Meaning. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so very much for that generous and genuine introduction. I have the privilege of helping shape and lead this conversation tonight, but it really is a privilege to be here with Kayum, who has worked really tirelessly and wholeheartedly to raise awareness and to improve both, going back to that phrase that you used, physically and spiritually, the situation of your people, the Uyghur people. I do want to say a word of appreciation to the Holocaust Museum. One of the things that's impressed me about the museum since I first returned to Montreal 12 years ago now is that recognition that part of remembering and honoring the memory of the Holocaust goes hand in hand with the importance of human rights and drawing those connections and being open to the stories of others and how our stories intersect to the things that are shared. And it's not everyone and it's not everywhere that does that. And so I want to recognize that with your leadership and with Alice's leadership. You know, it just so happened, unfortunately, that I was at Paperman's, which is the Jewish funeral home today. And I was in the clergy room before the service, and I look on the table, and what book do I see but Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And I thought that that was so fitting, not only because it served as an introduction to tonight, but because this is a book which in so many different times and places has been a source of inspiration and resilience. And so I want to ask you, since Jacques began by giving us some sense of what the situation of the Uyghur community is, we'll come to that, I'm sure, as part of the conversation, but what is it about, or what would you want people here to know about what the situation of the Uyghur community is, both in China and worldwide, that made this book the right thing at the right time?
Allô? Est-ce que vous attendez?
Yes.
Bonsoir, mesdames, messieurs. Merci beaucoup. Je suis très honoré d'être ici avec vous ce soir, Monsieur Jacques. Merci. I'm very pleased and very honored to be here, and especially today, December 10th. As you know, December 9th is a UN-recognized International Remembrance Day of Genocide Remembrance Day. And it has particular meaning for our community because 3 years ago, London, UK-based International Uyghur Tribunal declared that the treatment imposed by Chinese Communist Party towards Uyghur people is a genocide. So that was the first legislative, the first recognition officially by independent tribunal on the character of the policies we are as a community, as ethnic group subjected to. I'm very pleased and I'm very honored to be Canadian because my parliament was the first legislative body in the world to recognize Uyghur genocide in 2021. And last year, February 2023, our parliament was spearheaded the initiative to resettle 10,000 Uyghur refugees who are stuck in the third-party states and face deportation back to China. What is behind Uyghur genocide? I think it will be a good point to refresh what is behind this thing. Since Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, the Chinese Communist Party took active role in bringing up or bringing about the final, quote-unquote, the final solution to Uyghur question. Because what we have been saying that Uyghur people, we've been occupied by invading People's Liberation Army in 1949, 2 years prior to Tibet's occupation. And indeed, our region is designated as Xinjiang. In Chinese, it's called Xinjiang, which is roughly translated as a new colony. Ever since, for the last 7 decades, the region was prone to violence, ethnic cleansing. Sometimes it took very soft form, sometimes very harsh, but the last 10 or so years, it became intolerable. It turned into like all-out war against community, against ethnic group. And it's not like only Uyghurs, but all native people living in the region, including Kazakh people, Uzbek, Tatar, so predominantly Turkic-speaking Muslim people. This is the largest incarceration or detention of any ethnic group in the world since Holocaust. We talk about according to Chinese internal documents, 7 million people who've been subjected to so-called re-education. People sent to concentration camps where they are subjected to torture, brainwashing. People are subjected to, they are forced to abandon their religion. They are punished for speaking in their language. On Fridays, they are forced to eat pork. They're given alcohol, and women sterilized. And right now, China is running the largest human trafficking scheme in the world. By saying this, I am referring to the transfer of millions and millions, quote unquote, surplus labor force from our region to work as slaves in interior China. In preparation of this evening, I prepared these 2 lists of documents, but I think right now it's, I don't want to be very academic. Maybe it will be more useful if I go more like person-to-person approach, and I will welcome very much your questions. And there's so much to say, and so much trauma we live through. And coming back to your question, Lisa, a good friend of mine referred me to the book of Viktor Frankl's book, and I read this in Russian like 5 years ago. And at the time, I just realized, oh my God, this is so relevant to our community. It is so like, copy-paste. It's literally, someone in the concentration camps who just came out and telling the story. Because I acted as interpreter during parliamentary hearings to many ex-concentration detainees who were lucky enough to escape Chinese prisons, Chinese gulags, and what they've been subjected to, what kind of rape, torture, all this unimaginable cruelty. And the bigger question loomed over my shoulders, and I heard many times from witnesses, ex-concentration camps survivors, asking questions like, why does God allowing this to be happening? Why is it happening to us? What did we do wrong that we subjected to it? And by reading this book, I realized, okay, well, we are not the first who've been subjected to this. Very much likely, and unfortunately, we might not be the last. We cannot control external factors which affects us, but what we can do, we can address our internal strengths and find some meaning in suffering, not by glamoring it or making it glamorous, the suffering we are subjected to, but answering questions: what is our inner strength, and what do we do to cope with it? And maybe we'll come to that later, but maybe it's a good start to initiate our conversation, Lisa.
Thank you so much. As you're saying that, when you talk about recognizing the things that are out of your control and trying to live through that and trying to imagine how to find meaning without, as you say, glorifying suffering. I found this copy, my copy of Man's Search for Meaning, on my shelf before I came today. And you know how it is when you go back to an old book and you see where you've marked a passage or where you've dog-eared things. And the line that jumps out at me at this: everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And the other line that I think of with Frankl a lot is where he says that somebody who has a why for why they're living can live with almost any how, right? And so there are these lines that I don't think try to simplify suffering or cruelty or any of those things, but try to give a pathway as to how to survive it, but how to survive it while holding on to one's humanity. And so I wonder if you can talk a little, having been there for those testimonies, having seen people who've escaped from those gulags, what has helped them go forward and remake their lives in your experience?
Okay, I'll tell the story of Gulbahar Jalilova. This is a lady of Uyghur origin, ethnic Uyghur origin, but she's not even a Chinese citizen. She was a citizen of Kazakhstan. She went to China doing some small-scale trade, buying clothes and reselling in Kazakhstan. So one night, while she was visiting Uyghur region, she was taken away from hotel by police, and for 2 years she was put in the concentration camp. And she was subjected to torture, to rape. She described the stories like, that in her cell, probably smaller than room twice, they were like 50 people crowded like in one cell. Maybe half of this whole room, 50 people. And out of those 50 people, 14 died right in front of her during this detention. Young women, like young as 14, and as old as was 70 plus years old. And the only crime they had, because they were not Chinese, they were Muslim, and they were like not belonging to the Chinese ethnic group. They were viewed as barbaric, and they've been mistreated, and Chinese prison guardians will take away pretty-looking girls every night, and she would hear the screams and the rape, and then she was subjected to rape herself, electric batons, all these details. It's really hard to tell, to describe what she was subjected to. And if you're interested, you can visit Canadian Parliament website. In my testimony, there's a Uyghur testimonies on recorded video archives. But what kept her going is that the fellow inmates were telling her, "You are not Chinese citizen, and one day you will be liberated from here." They will realize that they made mistake. There's some external pressure, but you have to promise us once you get out, you will be telling the story that you've been subjected. We don't want to die in vain. We want the world to know what happened to us, and we want you to survive, and we want you to tell the story. And she did exactly that. The moment she left China, she stayed in Kazakhstan for a few days, and she took off to Turkey. And once in Turkey, she started contacting media. She started telling her story about what she was subjected to. She is now in France because Turkey put pressure on her, but she's keep doing it. And all these stories combined with others led me to believe that this book is it has to be like must-read book for our diaspora, for our community, because we are so much subjected to trauma. Even people who are not exposed to physical violence by themselves, but because we don't have contact with our family members for the last 10 or so years, we simply do not know what happened to them. Are they alive or dead? I have lost contact with my nieces and my nephews for several years. I simply do not know if they're alive or not. Imagine living in 21st century and not able to contact your mother, your father, and ask a very simple question: how are you, mom? How are you, father? And this is the daily reality Uyghur community is exposed to on a daily basis. We simply do not know. And that post-traumatic trauma and all these classic sample examples of lack of appetite, lack of concentration, depression, mood swings, this is so permanent, this is so, these check marks, they are so persistent within community. And I thought, when I read this book in Viktor Frankl's book many years ago, I said, well, it would be nice to have it in Uyghur, so people who do not speak English or other languages, they can read and consult this book. And maybe it would be one of the way of finding solution and finding some solace in answering that existential question you've been asking: why? Why?
And Frankl, of course, was a psychologist, right? And so he had that deep question, and while living through trauma, wanted to find a way through for himself, right, and for others. But this brings us maybe to ask and to talk about how this book came to be, and maybe something about the translator as well, because my understanding is there's a story there too.
Because I didn't went to Uyghur school per se, and I'm not very fluent in writing in Uyghur, so I thought, okay, I need to contact diaspora who would be willing to do this. And I have to mention here Mark Grushcow, father of Lisa. He is one of those enthusiasts within the Jewish community whom I have approached and asked, what would you think if we cooperate on this? And all this technical part he covered very well, and he helped a lot. I have to thank him here using this opportunity. And we contacted a translator. It's a lady, and she very hesitant putting her name first because her parents, her relatives are still there, and she lost contact with them. And she was saying, if my name will become known, maybe China will use this as a pretext to punish further my family members. So she's very hesitant, and we decided not to use her name and use anonymous name. But 2 days ago, she came to Canada as the first refugee, Uyghur refugee who've been resettled under M62 program. So it's an official program launched by our government to welcome 10,000 refugees who are stranded in the third-party states like Malaysia, Thailand, Egypt, Turkey, etc., Kazakhstan, etc. So there is the story behind this, that she is in safety now in Canada, came 2 days ago, and the translation was done, I think it was done well. And moreover, this book will be available online to consult for free for the community. Whoever wants to read it, they can be able to access it in Arabic script and in Latin script. And maybe I'm thinking we should probably use our Cyrillic script as well, because there are some Uyghurs who read in Cyrillic. So it's a project.
Thank you so much. And I have to say that a lot of my education around all of this has come from my father. And my father, when he started hearing and learning and going deep to find out more about what was going on in terms of this genocide in the Uyghur community, for him, there's no question that the motivation, among others, was to say, well, nobody was there for us when this was happening to us. How can we be silent when this is happening to anyone else? And a lot of us nod our heads at that, right? But how is it, do you think, that it's been so hard to raise awareness about what's going on here? And what is it that that Canadians can do? What would you have us know?
I think there are two elements into that. One bigger element, the definition of the genocide itself. Because after World War II, when Lemkin came out with the idea, there was a concept of genocide. There were it consisted of 5 elements, right? Like we all know the elements. But at that time, the element of technical surveillance didn't exist. And I think it is very much relevant, and especially for Uyghur case, and especially because China involved in it. I'm talking about artificial intelligence and the technology of surveillance. There are many examples to it, but I'll give you one example. Huawei, a well-known Chinese company, patented in 2018 a software called Uyghur Alarm. What this program does, if you're an Uyghur or Kazakh or Uzbek or whatever, walking in the street in anywhere in China, and if your face is caught by camera, within 15 seconds that program can run the system and send alarm to nearest police headquarters saying there is an Uyghur in your street on that spot. That's technological surveillance. We talk about cell phones, that every Uyghur has to download software. It's basically spying software, showing your movement, where you move, where you're going, which places you visited, etc. And every 500 meters in Urumqi city, there is like a police has checkpoint where you as an Uyghur have subjected to, you have to demonstrate that you have that software installed in your cell phone. Every Uyghur household equipped with cameras of surveillance, and cameras account how many times you use back door and front door of your household. And if in any given time, let's say in November last, you use back door of your household more frequently than front door, you will be summoned to police headquarters, and you have to, explain. If you're receiving phone call from overseas, you have to report to police headquarters within 24 hours, and you have to write down the whole conversation in writing. And if your conversation is not matching police records, you will be punished. This is why people do not answer phone calls from overseas, from unknown numbers. This is why we cannot call our parents and our relatives. This is just what tiny elements, like a tip of iceberg. What is damning about it, it's the technology which was test run on us. It's been propagated all across China, especially in Tibet, and especially more so in Hong Kong. And eventually it ends up propelling regimes like in Iran, in Venezuela, and these authoritarian dictatorial states, they import these surveillance technologies from China. So that first element to your question about, about what you've been asking. And the second part,
is what you would want Canadians to be aware of, but
yes.
Also what it is that we can do.
Coming to that point, sometimes we might think, well, I'm Canadian, I live in Montreal, I have never heard about Uyghur people, these marginalized people, somewhere like some thousand kilometers away. It does not affect my life, like why should I care? I think it's erroneous thinking. You as a Canadian have direct responsibility. In fact, I'd like to ask you here, like what you have as a clothes on you, can you check and say, if it's made in China? I bet like within the group here, we will find people with clothing it's like made in China, Let me tell you, in China, 90% of cotton in China is grown in our region, Uyghur region. So there's a 90% chance that this t-shirt, that pant or sweater was done, if it's made in China and you bought this, so it's 90% chance that it's been tainted by slave labor. You go visit any shopping mall in Montreal, and our market shelves are full with products tainted by Uyghur slave labor. So by purchasing these products, we are indirectly subsidizing the ongoing genocide. And mind you, this genocide didn't end, it's still ongoing. It started 7-8 years ago, but it's still ongoing. Still, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to camouflage it and portray it differently, but still, we are subjected to all these cruelties. And more so right now, because of Western companies and because of labor, price is going up, China shifted its tactics, and now they are relocating what is called surplus labor force from Uyghur homeland into China, interior China, to work as slaves. So this is a big, huge problem. So it's huge, biggest systematic, institutionalized human trafficking scheme. This is one element which probably reflects to you. But apart from cotton, 30% of the global supply of tomato comes from our region. So every time you go to Subway, McDonald's, you use the ketchup. If it's made in China, most probably you're using slave labor force. So-called green, clean energy. We all talk about these days. It's very a la mode, how we say, solar panels. 50% of the world production of solar panels come from Uyghur region, because Uyghur region is extremely rich in polysilica, that element which is runs solar panels. So if you installing solar panels made in China, it is given that you're using slave labor force products. So probably that aspect, it should be addressed, what it takes to our elected officials to act upon. USA enforced UFLPA, which is called Uyghur Labor Force Prevention Act, and since 2022, I believe, they have seized merchandise worth of $5 billion, a few thousand containers, because out of suspicion that they are implicated in forced labor. Like 5,000 containers and 0 container for Canada. So here again, Canada is lagging behind. Not only we are not fulfilling our international moral duty, we also in breach of our CUSMA trade agreement, which is Canada, US, Mexico Free Trade Agreement. Because those products which are banned entry to US, they are being derouted and they end up in Canada. So Canada effectively became a dumping ground for slave labor products. Organ harvesting and etc. I can talk more, but you just stop me.
You know, we'll have just, I think, 1 or 2 more questions from me, because I know that we want a chance to open up the conversation. But just I'm thinking, Kayum, as you're talking about that level of surveillance and technological interference, you know, I think many of us involved in synagogue life and Jewish community life, when the pandemic started and everything moved online, there was all this concern about Zoom bombing, right? Would a service be Zoom bombed? Would a Jewish program be Zoom bombed? The only time I have actually experienced a significant Zoom bombing was an online event involving the Uyghur community. And it was almost certainly, I think, as we were talking about it after, originating from China. And so the reach is really, for those of us who don't spend a lot of time usually thinking about this, really quite sobering. So the question that I have is this, and this is, you know, it's striking because on the one hand, some of us know about the story about how the Dalai Lama approached a bunch of American rabbis at some point and said, tell us the secret of living in diaspora and living in exile. How do we as Tibetans learn from you as Jews about how to survive in a state of exile? Roger Kamenitz's book, The Jew in the Lotus, is the famous account of that. And in a way, this conversation feels similar, right? There's this Jewish experience that Frankl expressed from the concentration camps, from the Holocaust, that he managed to wrestle meaning from and answer to those existential questions, and your community is saying, this is valuable to us, this is relevant to us, we want to learn from it. But the other thing in this conversation is I'm thinking, you know, here you are with these existential physical threats, and you're still putting time and effort into nourishing those spiritual aspects. And for us, from the Jewish community right now, I think that's a question that we're coming to, when there's a sense of, in a different way, obviously, physical insecurity or lack of safety. How do you also still stop and realize that it's important to nourish and strengthen the spirit? And so I wonder if you could say just a little more about what you hope this book will do, and why, of all the things that you've put your energy towards, this was important that it be part of it.
I think that the profound takeaway from Frankl's book is that it's not just about surviving oppression, but it's about maintaining human dignity. It's about meaning, it's about psychological autonomy in the face of systematic attempts to destroy those fundamental capacities of any human being. Witnessing, preserving, it can be manifested in cultural preservation as a meaning, is a meaning making. It can be a witnessing as a moral imperative, because for people, let's say ex-concentration camp survivors, to come out and testify especially that lady who was subjected to rape, to say, I was raped, it takes moral courage. It takes moral imperative. She forgot about her self-being, about her selfish, instincts, and preserving whatever dignity she left, but she found dignity in testifying and accusing Chinese Communist Party in the atrocities which they're perpetrating on her people. So I think Frankl's work is fundamentally about being a witness, and that contemporary global awareness of the Uyghur genocide, it continues the tradition of that moral testimony. Like in Canada, we only like maybe 2,000 at most. We are smallest, probably smallest and newest community, ethnic diaspora in Canada. But because of that thing which is happening to us collectively, every one of us think that it is our moral imperative that we have to come out and say and talk and explain and educate, because the word does mean, the words that does count, it has power. And the ultimate lesson is one of the hope. Even under the most oppressive conditions, human beings retain the capacity to create meaning, preserve dignity, and maintain hope for future freedom and cultural continuity. So probably my personal takeout from the Viktor Frankl's book and reading his essays is that we have to hope, and it's like after bitter winter, we so much enjoy May, spring is coming, that the darkness is not there for eternally, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you. This, I think, might be the right time to open it up. Kat, if I can turn to you for that. And also, I want to say I'm so glad that Sandy for Bibliophile is here. If you, like me, perhaps read this book years ago, I can't think of a better time to revisit it. And if you never read it, I can't think of a better time to encounter it for the first time.
So whoever wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand and I'll come around.
Hi, my name is Rivka Aldenfeld. I'm very involved in working with refugee rights and bringing refugees to Canada, and I cleared this with Lisa earlier. But I wanted to say first, I think what we've learned in Canada over the years is that we have to, in order for people to respond, in order for people to care, we have to humanize the numbers. We have to find a way. I'm not saying we're going to do it tonight, but to think about how, and I understand what you're saying about your friend who doesn't want her name to be known, and it maybe most of the Uyghurs who are in Canada are afraid to become public because they have family, and absolutely, but there needs to be a way to humanize people, to individualize them. I think people will remember that in 2015, when that one picture of one little boy, one Syrian boy lying on a beach, galvanized the whole country. Alan Kurdi. And Alan Kurdi died along with his mother and his brother, but nobody remembers their names. Only Alan Kurdi, who looked like any other little Canadian boy, somehow got everyone going. And there are journalists who can help you with this story. I'm not the expert on how to make it public. The other thing is, I realized recently there are 4 and maybe by now 5 Uyghur restaurants in Montreal. And now that sounds superficial, but I think, and I don't know how, but I think somehow to use the presence of these restaurants and who they are and how to somehow get the story out as well. Here are people from this culture, from this company, they're already contributing to our society, they're doing their best, and how can we somehow use the presence of these restaurants in a way that's imaginative? Third thing, though, is that, I mentioned this to Lisa earlier, this book has had such resonance among people all over the world, as we know, but 2 examples that really are stunning to me is one is a man who is now in Toronto, whose name is, I'm going to mispronounce his name is Khayvet Yalom. He's a Rohingya refugee from Myanmar who tried to escape, was arrested by the Australians, ended up in Manus Island, which is the most horrible prison that the Australians maintain on a little island. After 3.5 years there, he escaped. He was the only person to ever have escaped from Manus Island. While he was there, he found this book in the prison. And there is an interview which I can send you that was done with him in the Times of Israel, where he talks about what this book, how he found the book, page by page by page, and what this book meant to him. This man is now in Toronto. He arrived in 2018. He's an activist. He's also trying to study. But here was a Rohingya refugee from Myanmar for whom this book meant everything. And the last one is somebody who has become a very good friend of mine, a man called Shamarke Dubo, who's from Somalia, who's also in Canada, who came to Canada, who got to Victoria, was the first ever African elected to the city council in Victoria. So he just had become a citizen, so he could vote for the first time. He is an activist and works to help other people. And when he was asked which book was important to him, he named this book as well. So I think if these two guys think this book is important, there are many other refugees and other people in trouble who have found this book meaningful. And I congratulate you on doing this. And I think the more we get out the message of how this book has a lasting impact on people from everywhere, the better job we'll do.
I had the opportunity to speak to Mr. Masimov a little bit before. I was amazed at the level of ignorance among the people of the world of Uyghur, except what we hear sometimes in the media, that there's discrimination in China or in Russia, where a lot of people are confused about the whereabouts of most Uyghurs I'm sure, please forgive me for not pronouncing the name, it's difficult to pronounce with the spelling. But Canada is one of the refugee countries. You said there was 2,000 in Canada. Where would other countries? Where would refugees mostly go to? Which other countries? United States or Western Europe? And how are they treated as compared to Canada? You said even the woman in Canada came a couple of days ago doesn't want to reveal her identity. Are there other places where Uyghurs have been accepted as refugees and have the established communities where they are willing eventually to reveal their identities?
Thank you for your question. I think we have to explain that Uyghur people are Turkic-speaking people and they're Muslim predominantly. And we used to live in the region historically known as Turkestan. This is a name given by Persians to us in 7th century, meaning the land of Turks. So we are related to Turkish people in Turkey, to some extent to Hungarian people. We have the same, origin from Siberia, Altai region. So in 19th century, there was a great game described by Kipling when the British Empire and Russian Empire, they vied for the control of Central Asia. So the whole region was divided into, Russian Turkestan, or what was known as in history as Russian Turkestan. And eastern part, that is, northwestern part of present-day China, it fell under control of Manchu Empire or China, and it's been known as Chinese Turkestan. So there's Western Turkestan and Russia and Eastern Turkestan. Same people live on the territory. So imagine the Caspian Sea all the way till the Great Wall of China, that Eurasian steppes, like big significant cities from the history of Silk Road, Bukhara, Samarkand, Kashgar, Gulja, all these cities, along Silk Road. So fast forward 1949, the Republic of East Turkestan was occupied by joint invasion of Soviets and Chinese Communist Party, People's Liberation Army in 1949, 2 years prior the invasion of Tibet. Ever since, this region was known as Xinjiang in Chinese. Xinjiang in Chinese means new colony, a new territory. And that's where we live now. We identify ourselves as Uyghurs. of Turkic extraction, and we refer to our homeland as East Turkestan. The history of immigration to Canada is very recent, at the most three decades, and we number about 2,000 people, like from coast to coast. So once again, it's probably the smallest and newest community in Canada.
I was asking about other countries as well.
Yeah, as well other countries. Okay, the largest concentration of Uyghur diaspora in exile right now is presently Turkey. Turkey hosts about 50 to 80,000 Uyghur refugees who fled from China within the last 2 decades. So effectively, Turkey hosts the second largest refugee community apart from Syrians. They are Uyghur people. But we know in Syria, right now there's like a change of power, but it was a brutal civil war. Whereas in China, there is no war, apparently, according to Chinese state media. But there are 80,000 or so refugees, Uyghur refugees, in the peacetime who've been managed to escape China and settle in Turkey. So the largest concentration of exiled community right now is in Turkey. And Turkey became a natural hub for us because of this linguistic and cultural and ethnic kinship. We are very close to Turkish people. In Western Europe, there are not that many, and in Canada, I told you, and in US, probably 5,000. So a few thousand in Western Europe, maybe a few thousand in Australia, but mainly in Turkey.
And my understanding is, just to answer the rest of that question, that the concern about sharing one's identity doesn't have to do with the receptivity of the host society. It has to do with concern about surveillance from China reaching overseas.
Yes, well, there are two elements into it. Let's say if we talk about Turkey, even though the public opinion is very favorable towards us, the government's position is very contradictory, I would say. And there was a statement from Turkish officials saying any manifest of disagreement with Chinese policies will be viewed by Turkish authorities as menace to Turkey. So they equating even peaceful protests of exiled community in Turkey against China as menace to Turkey. So much because unfortunately we have seen shift in the politics from NATO, from Western oikumena to authoritarian Russia and China. Very unfortunate. This is happening, but there is a second element into that. We talk about foreign interference, and we talk about foreign interference, as I have mentioned to George earlier. Uyghur diaspora in Canada, we've been acting as a canary in coal mines. It's been 2 decades we've been alarming our officials that there is a threat, there is intimidation, surveillance, physical menace, cyber spying, intimidation in Canada. And we've been saying that some people might think that when you physically trespass international borders, once you're in Canada, you might erroneously think that you're in safety, but this is not the case. At least for our community, for Tibetans, for Falun Dafa followers, for Hong Kongers, for Taiwanese, this is not the case. And China is very active in intimidating, menacing, threatening, and forcing people into silence. So imagine the level of brutality we've been exposed. Even in Canada, we don't feel safety, and including physical safety. So there are many elements into it. Hopefully, because of the revelations in Global Mail, because of that inquiry, and actually I testified before the Commissioner Marie-Josée Hogue, and hopefully, finally, we will see some change in attitude and some action on behalf of the government.
So thank you, first of all, so much, Mr. Masimov, for educating us this evening, and thank you, Rabbi Grushcow, for helping lead the conversation. I'm going to quote another Holocaust survivor, Elie Wiesel, who said that to hear a witness is to become one. And so this evening you've made a number of us witnesses, and we have media here as well who will help continue that work. And I'd like to ask you what you expect from people who understand or have some understanding of the situation and how we can help.
Yeah, I would like to thank you very much, the larger Jewish community in Canada, for being supportive of our pleas. Unfortunately, the level of support and understanding we have seen within Jewish community was not matched by, let's say, our co-religionists, so-called Muslim countries, So much that, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, he went to China last year and he said, what is China is doing towards Uyghur Muslims is just thing, and he justified the existence of so-called re-education camps as a just thing, and etc. So this is big geopolitics, I understand that, but at least these host countries, which host significant number of refugees who fled from China and menace deportation, they should not actively cooperate with China and deport these people back. At the very least, let them go to safe countries like Canada, but they're not doing that, and even more so, they cooperate and they push. Well, I'm very reconciled, like they were saying, reconciled towards community and understanding, and the fact that I'm here today with you in this very much like Holocaust Museum itself and talking about things, it is a part of a trauma healing for myself, because by sharing my pain and the cruelty we are subjected as a group, as an ethnic group, it is so meaningful for us. Please.
I want to give one very, very small thing. And for this, I'm indebted to someone who some of you know, Andrea Fieldman, who's been a teacher at Temple for decades. And she wrote me a letter a couple of years ago because, like many synagogues, we give out Hanukkah candles to the kids and to the teachers. And she said, the Hanukkah candles you're giving out are made in China. And how can we celebrate our festival of freedom with something that was probably made from slave labor? And ever since then, I have been adamant that we have to find our candles for Hanukkah from somewhere else. That we search out, the candles that are made in Israel, that are made elsewhere. And it's such a small thing, but I think big things start with small things. And so I would encourage us to be, as Kayum was saying, more aware of what we're implicated in, what the things that we buy in particular come from, what suffering is bound up in it, and especially when we're thinking about things that we use for our religious and our own cultural celebrations, to try to make sure that it isn't tainted by that. It's a small thing, but I think it's an important one, and I'm grateful to Andrea for teaching me that a couple of years ago, and I'm grateful to you for really underlining it tonight.
We can take one more question.
Hello. So I didn't know very much before I came here, and I'm very, very grateful and very happy to be here tonight. If we continue to do not nothing, but almost nothing, what do you see happening? What's going to happen to this community, to your people, and how long is it going to take, if we just continue this way? Kind of like, I'm going to carry the story with me, speak to whoever I can, but what do you see?
If things go as it is now, within 20, 30 years, we are facing the extinction of 25 million strong ethnic group, as same as Tibetans. This has happened already to Manchu people, to Mongol people in China. We will be forced to assimilate. And we have that very short time span, maybe 20 to 30 years at most. Already, Uyghur language banned from kindergarten. We're not allowed to speak our language. We're not allowed to develop our language. We are forced. Uyghur girls are forced to marry, Chinese men. Sterilization is very much present, even though in China right now there's a big demographic crisis, and Chinese authorities try to address this. But this is not the case for Uyghurs and Tibetans. We are not allowed to have children. Sterilization is very systematic. Organ harvesting, element which I didn't mention, is very much present. And there is even halal organ harvesting when Chinese companies go after rich Gulf clientele, Muslim clientele, and advertise halal organs of their fellow Muslims to come visit and get the halal regions, halal organs. Nuclear explosions, the last one happened in 1996. We've been subjected to 46 open-air nuclear explosions in our region. So the cancer is very much, propagated, very much actively. Like the cancer rate is very high, and it adds to the significant drop in population, environmental degradation, and mass inflow of Chinese migrants from inland into the region. So in 1949, the ethnic Chinese population consisted only 3% in our region. Right now it's hovering, it's about 45%. So as I said, within 20, 30 years, if things won't change, we will be facing extinction, and we will be gone, gone with the wind, which is damage, which is c'est dommage not only for us as ethnic group, but for the China civilization as well, for the Chinese mosaic. We've been the force which actually built China. Kublai Khan, he spoke Uyghur language. Marco Polo, when he traveled and lived for 17 years at Kublai's court for 17 years, he spoke Uyghur. Uyghur language, Uyghur alphabet was an official language of the Kublai Empire. The Beijing city was built by Uyghur architects and by Uyghurs. We have brought Buddhism via Central Asia, via Uyghurs. Buddhism was introduced to China, for example. There's so many elements into it. Even the Great Wall of China was built at the time to protect southern China from invading barbaric nomads from the north. Hunnic people. We are Hunnic people. So if you take that into consideration, I think Chinese Communist Party does not realize that they are kind of like doing in detriment of their own identity, and by actively eliminating one group, they are seeding the seeds of the future conflict, of the future malfortune which will come to them.
If I can say just one thing before handing it back over. There's a tradition in Judaism of what's called an echempta, that you try to find a word of comfort, no matter how heavy or how hard a conversation is. And it doesn't take away from the heaviness, but it perhaps adds a little hope. And so I want to turn to Viktor Frankl for our echempta tonight. There's one passage that stands out for me, and that might in some ways answer that question about each of us trying to leave here with some sense of what we might do. And so when he writes about the meaning of life, he writes, "I doubt whether a doctor can answer this question in general terms, for the meaning of life differs from man to man, from day to day, and from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment. To put the question in general terms would be comparable to the question posed to a chess champion, 'Tell me, master, what is the best move in the world?' There simply is no such thing as the best or even a good move, apart from a particular situation in a game and the particular personality of one's opponent. The same holds for human existence. One should not search for an abstract meaning of life. Everyone has his own specific vocation or mission to carry out a concrete assignment which demands fulfillment. Therein he cannot be replaced, nor can his life be repeated. Thus, everyone's task is as unique as is their specific opportunity to implement it.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's quite difficult to conclude. I mean, I could have stayed like all of us for hours, listening to you, sharing your feelings, sharing your pain, trying to understand. Two quick things. Number one, en passant, you mentioned Mahmoud Abbas, who justified what was happening to the Uyghurs. In 1984, he wrote a book in which he justified the genocide, the Holocaust. So we are again sharing a common point here. The second thing I want to mention, and maybe I'm repeating myself, but it's a lady who quoted at our last evening, the commemoration of Kristallnacht. Her name is Bebarani, and she is she was an Iranian activist. And she said one sentence, I'm not going to translate it into English because I'm going to lose in translation. Which the quote I read was in French, and she said, "Pour vivre, il faut assassiner le silence." You led me into this quotation, into this quote. To me, it's so fundamental. The very first thing is to refuse to stay silent. And while some of you, of course, have difficulties because of what happens to your loved ones abroad, we don't have this constraint, and we therefore don't have this excuse. The last thing I would like to say very quickly is that, and this is more, I'm moved by what you said. I'm moved by the questioning, Rabbi Grushcow. You have picked, and that's funny. I was talking about this book with my wife yesterday, preparing for tonight. I didn't want to sound like I was ignorant and I hadn't read the book, so she helped me, and she had. And it's funny because the quotes that you have taken are exactly the quote that she got caught on, which was quite amazing, quite remarkable. And this is a more formal part, if I may, of the conclusion. We ask all of you that your Holocaust journey doesn't stop here, that you we invite you to stay in touch with the museum, to attend our events, to bring your friends and family to our exhibits, help support our new museum project and educate the next generations through our pedagogical tools, workshops and guides. Please stay to look at the never-before-seen objects from the museum's collection that are being displayed, especially for this event. Also a reminder that Bibliophile is selling the English translation of Man's Search for Meaning. Thank you very much for your authenticity. Thank you very much for a remarkable evening. And, you have to promise us to come back and visit the new museum that we are building, which makes us so proud and so full of hope, and a hope that we're going to share with you and your people.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Jacques. Dernier mot d'appréciation. Je suis très honoré et j'aimerais présenter ma livre à vous pour votre musée. I really wish you can keep this, and I'm really honored to have this book in your archives. And I would be honored if you will accept this. Merci beaucoup.
No?